There was a great book that came out in 2003 by Tim Kasser called The High Price of Materialism. And he offered a scientific explanation of how our contemporary culture of consumerism and materialism affects our everyday happiness, our psychological health, and our pursuit of our dreams. And what it really showed, and it was eye opening for me because I realized I was doing this in my own life, is that when we place so much of our values on the accumulation of wealth, material possessions, or even if it's success or recognition, accolades, we not only face a greater risk of unhappiness, but we also end up feeling more anxiety, depression, low self esteem, low self worth. There are problems with intimacy. I mean, the list goes on and on. And to me, when I start looking at this, what it is all a symptom of is a concept I call unmattering. We wake up every day and we just have this overwhelming agony that these lives we are living don't result in any significance. And it just leads us down this spiral of, call it the epidemic of loneliness or helplessness or hopelessness. You pick it, but I think unmattering sits at the core of it.
What a word, unmattering. And I find myself also contemplating, and maybe this is just, the stage that I am in my life is like, what, maybe not legacy. I don't necessarily care too much about what happens after I die, but I care about while I'm on this planet, how can I positively impact the people around me, the people that I touch, the people that I'm able to communicate with. And this word unmattering, I've had swaths of women reach out to, our help desk who feel invisible, who feel like they have been in service to other people and not in service to themselves. And a lot of my demographic, John, just so you know, tends to be women who are in, perimenopause and menopause. And this is sort of, I like to think of this time as like a second spring where we've spent decades, let's say, in service to our children, maybe for, in our careers, to our partners, what have you. And then as we have this transition into, children are getting older, they're less dependent on us for food and, they can dress themselves, at least hopefully, some teenagers maybe need some assistance. But for the most part, there's a bit more flexibility and time to evaluate what actually matters to us because, 40, you have at least 40% of your life left, at least 40 to 50% of your life left at the time that you are reaching perimenopause and menopause. And I think it's a great opportunity for women, and I think men in general, men and women really, but women in particular, I speak to my community, where we can reevaluate what really matters, what we want to be doing with the time that we have left. And I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about, you break down the book into three main categories, like mindset shifts, behavioral changes, and then the psychology of progress and how we track our progress. And I wanted to maybe start with the first one that you talk about in the book, mustering the power to do something great. So imagine, I call my audience, sometimes I call them lovingly my Bettys. So imagine, Betty, she's 48 years old, daughter's just gone off to college, and she's thinking about making a change. What are some of the first things that she needs to consider?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things that we end up doing is we end up just going through the motions in life instead of having that wake up moment when we realize that this life that we wanted is at a different point than we ever realized it would be. So when you come to that wake up moment, I think there are a number of things that you can do. I think one of the biggest things to work on is your overall self-worth, because I think especially at that moment when kids have gone off, you're searching for this new identity within you, you're questioning your self-worth and what value do you have. So what I like to do is recommend that people take a step back and really analyze when they were younger, what were those aspirations before they had the marriage, before they had the aspirations of having kids, that they found a huge passion in. Because I think when we get back to that and what was really lighting us up earlier in our life, it's a great indication of where we can begin again as we look at the future self that we want to build. And this whole chapter is about life crafting which I describe as the journey kind of as a mission angler. And I picked angler because I like to fish. But so often, unlike an angler, we're not really looking at this life purpose. We're not really angling for it in the way that we are searching for it. And so this process really amounts to reflecting on your present, where you're at, and your future self, and setting goals that you have for your future self, and then taking concrete steps to achieve them. But I think, as I just mentioned earlier, it starts with really examining your self-worth and what created that self-worth for you before these other elements entered your life that are now leaving it.
And I think it's also important to mention time, insofar as it's never too late. I think that a lot of the feedback that I've heard, and I've also struggled with this concept as well. It's like, oh, but I'm already 40, or I'm already 50, I'm already 60. It must be too late for me to start anything new. And I like, in the book, you talk about this idea of brand reinvention, like never being afraid to reinvent yourself. And I think that the other piece that I would add to that is that it's never too late to start, right? There's a woman online, I think her handle is Train with Joan. I think that that's what her handle is. And she started weightlifting when she was maybe 70, I want to say 60, 70. And she has been training now for, I don't know exactly how many years, call it 5 years, maybe 10 years. And she looks incredible. And she's 80 years old. She was just on the cover of Women's Health magazine. And it's like, it's never too late. Like, you can be an 80-year-old jacked woman. If you let's say if that was your goal, you're like, you know what, prior to having kids, I really love to work out, and then with the breastfeeding and the soccer games and the whatever it is, and I want to get back to that, like this. And that's a very good example of someone who started quote unquote late, right, later in life, in her 60s, and was able to kind of realize or actualize those dreams. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe your own perspective on time, and if you've run up against that comment as well, like I've run out of time, or it's too late, it must be past my time for me.
Now, my view on time, and it's something that I developed when I was much younger, is that it's malleable. And I think that's important for people to understand, that wherever you're at in your life, you have a chance to do a do-over. And I look at my mom as a great example of this. I have two younger siblings, and as they were entering into high school, she decided that she wanted to give herself a second opportunity at the career that she always wanted, because she was a stay-at-home mom. And so they had just moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. They were opening up the Tennessee Aquarium, and she became employee number 2 for them, and handled all the kind of the events and the management of all the members. But for her, it was a reawakening of the second half of her life. And she ended up spending 25 years with the aquarium. And it ended up being some of the most, I guess, profoundly gratifying years of her life, because of the experiences that she got leading these member groups all the way from the Galapagos Islands to safaris in Kenya. And what I really liked about my mom's approach to it is she wanted to have all these life experiences. And my dad was a person who constantly traveled for work, and he was kind of sick of getting on a plane. So she kind of crafted this whole life for herself through this job that gave her the ability to do these life experiences with it. And that's a great example of, she was probably in her late 40s, early 50s when she made that pivot. And I myself was in my late 40s when I made the pivot to doing what I am doing today. I had spent, for background for the audience, most of my career as a senior executive in companies and then in the private equity world. But I think so many of us have this inner voice that's there tapping us on the shoulder, and oftentimes we don't listen to it. And that's what was happening to me. And so if I had a bigger do-over, I would have done this reinvention earlier. But I think the world for the younger generations that we're going into now is changing so quickly that they're going to have to reinvent themselves much more than you or I or most of your listeners have. But even if you're facing perimenopause or menopause, it's still a great opportunity to give yourself the gift that you can reinvent yourself. I'm living proof of it. My mom's living proof. And there's never a time that you don't have that opportunity to change who you want to be and how you want to approach your life.